Hello everyone, my name is Carrie Broderman and I'm going to tell you about the research and the study I've done, which is about the factors which influence Chinese students to study abroad. Today I would like to introduce you to my study, and then next we'll move on to the introduction of the factors. These include the history of Chinese students abroad, the college entrance exam, filial piety, and the personal and professional network of Chinese people. Then we'll move on to the study portion of my presentation, which includes the method, results, implications, limitations, and then the overall significance. Why did I ask, why do Chinese students study abroad? Well, I'm a I was a teacher at Shanghai University of Finance and Economics, and I teach first-year students, and every year I ask them, do you want to go abroad? And each year it's the same response. They shake their heads, and then I ask them, okay, why do you not want to go abroad? And a lot of students say, no, it's that my parents want me to. So I thought that this would be the perfect question to base a study around. First, I'll start off by giving you a little bit of history of Chinese students abroad. Before 1978, China was really closed off due to the Cultural Revolution. But once it opened up, Jimmy Carter's science and technology advisor, Frank Press, visited China and then set up an exchange of scholars. So they exchanged 50 scholars, and these students from China were rigorously sought out and selected by the Chinese government, and they were usually in the fields of science and technology. But after 1984, the government in China said, okay, whoever wants to go abroad can. Only if you can support yourself, you're free to go. And since then, the number of students around the world from China studying abroad has really skyrocketed. Next, I'll go ahead and tell you about the Chinese National Higher Entrance Exam, which in China they call the Gaokao, and I will also be calling it throughout the presentation Gaokao. The Gaokao is a test that is required to enter Chinese colleges. It's kind of like the SAT, but not really, because, well, college admittance is solely based on your Gaokao score, and it can only be taken once a year. And if you want to take it again, then you have to go through another year of high school to then get the chance to take it one more time. So it is quite different from our SATs. Also, because your college admittance is solely based on this score, you don't have a GPA, you really have the students here have a lot of pressure to do well on this exam. One student in Cocking study in 2011 said, we can lose everything at the Gaokao. A bad score means a bad university, and this means we have a bad job, and this means we have a bad life. So, this is really what determines their lives, as a lot of Chinese students think. So in 2012, 75% of students were accepted into a university. With such a high population in China, it is hard to get all the students into a university. And at that, only 2% will make it into one of the top 5 universities. So these students, which maybe they're not happy with the university they got into, or they did really poorly on the Gaokao, they can apply to universities abroad with different exams. So in the US, they might be taking SATs, or they might just need an English exam. It just depends where they choose to go. Next, I'll tell you all about filial piety. And filial piety is the duty of obedience and respect towards one's elders and ancestors. And this is a Confucian virtue, and a lot of people here would say it's really the #1 Confucian virtue. And it's really to behave morally and uphold your family's name, by the way you behave and act. But really, it goes also that you will make sacrifices for your parents and for their wishes. So in this case, a lot of parents might say, okay, the education abroad is better, or some parents believe that a foreign degree, looks more academic, scholarly, and some parents already know where their child will be working, and they said, okay, English is what they need, and I want them to go abroad. So for Western standards, it's hard to really understand this virtue of filial piety, but children in China, it's what's accepted, it's what's normal, and a lot of them, you know, feel like this is just what you do. You follow what your parents suggest. So this may be another factor which influences their decision to study abroad. Lastly, we're going to talk about the personal and professional network, which in China they call guanxi. Guanxi is similar to what we say in the West, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. And Bien and Ang in 1997 had a study where they really laid out well what guanxi is. And they said, unlike Christianity, which puts individuals in reference to God, Confucianism relates individuals to their significant others. So, for example, if I help your son out to get a job, then maybe later on in life you will help me out with money. You know, these are all just dependent on what your guanxi is. The more favors you do for people, the better guanxi you have. And some people have already found a job for their child within their guanxi network, and this is really, you know, really useful in some cases. But for the parents that don't have guanxi network, then it's hard for their children to find a job. And this could be another determining factor for these students who, you know, want to get out there with a good degree from a reputable university in a saturated job market. Then I would like to tell you about a previous study that was done in 1994 by Brzezinski. Unlike before 1994, a lot of people studied Chinese moving abroad to different countries in order to find out more about the brain drain phenomenon, which was that, you know, Chinese students would leave China to get a better education, but then they would never come back. Therefore, China was losing all of its brainiacs. It was losing its scientists. And Brzezinski actually in 1994 found a study that it was really focused around students that would be returning to China. And these students said that to go abroad, that it would gain more prestige and it would maximize their future potential, and that a degree abroad deemed superior as an equivalent degree in China, which I would also agree is true today due to the students' responses in my survey. And lastly, the students said that the system was you know, maybe more fair in the US due to the merit-based system, whereas in China they really are working with guanxi and filial piety to meet their parents' goals. So next we'll go on to the study that I did with my classes. And the method here was a survey. It consisted of 17 questions in English, and it was all translated into Chinese. And I also asked my colleagues to volunteer their classes. In total, there were 13 classes that took the survey, and it resulted in 154 participants. The participants were very equally matched, so 51 were male, 48% were female. And most of my students are on this track to go to the UK, which is why 92% said that they will be going to the UK to study abroad. With the number one factor here, it was a major influential factor, is this Gaokao exam. We'll focus on this 51%, and these are students who are going abroad because they couldn't get into a good university in China. So when I was going through the last portion, which was the essay portion of the survey, as you can see, a huge number wrote just that they could not get into a good university in China, but if they had gotten a better score, they would be staying in China. Then we have 20% of students who didn't take the Gaokao. So this means that either they could go back to high school for a year to take the Gaokao again, or they have to go abroad to get a college education. And lastly, we do have 29% who said that it was their dream to study abroad. So we can see from these results that the Gaokao is really the most influential factor, But let's go on to some other results from the survey. Here we see that, which was very surprising to me, the first question said, I really want to study abroad. And all of the answers total were in the strongly agree and the agree, a few in the neutral, but none were in the disagree and strongly disagree. And that was very surprising to me because of my first question, which is, do you want to study abroad? And all of them say no. The next factor that was very surprising, it asks, I am only studying abroad to increase my chances of getting a well-paid job. From the results of neutral, disagree, and strongly disagree, this makes up around 60% of the students. And so if 60% of the students say, you know, it doesn't really matter if I go abroad, this is not to benefit my future job prospects, I was very, very surprised to see that. The next question says, my family has a large professional network, or guanxi, and I will get a well-paid job no matter if I study abroad or not. About 44% of students said disagree or strongly disagree, and that their families will not be able to help them get a job and, you know, through their guanxi network. So maybe these students are trying to get, you know, a foreign degree to help them in the job market. Then with the last three questions, which are, I am only studying abroad to become fluent in English, I am only studying abroad to learn more about Western culture, and I plan on staying in England and America to study abroad. The most important thing here is that these students are really studying abroad for Western culture. So much like Western students study abroad, I mean maybe Americans in Italy or Germany, they're also studying abroad to find out more about, you know, language of English, culture. I found that to be very interesting. And then the last question, I plan on staying in England and America to work after studying abroad. The highest number was neutral. So I think some people may think, you know, if I got a job, I'd stay, but, you know, if I didn't, I'd go back home. And yeah, that was for those results. Let's go on now to the limitations of the study. First of all, in China, it is considered rude to say no because they don't want to lose face. And in some cases, they might not want to say no because they think it'll hurt your feelings. So they might use the words maybe or even yes, depending on the situation. For example, in my classes, sometimes I will ask them about Western food, and I ask them if they like cheese or bread. And some of my students say maybe. Whereas in the West, we would definitely say yes or no. They feel that this might hurt my feelings. So in my study, this could have skewed my results because they may not have used disagree and strongly disagree appropriately by Western standards. When I looked at the essay portions, there were over 10 students who explicitly said, I do not want to study abroad. But we can see above here in the results, it says, I really want to study abroad, and we do not have anyone that checked disagree or strongly disagree. So this is a good example of this limitation. Also, it can be assumed that all participants come from upper middle class to upper class families because the yearly tuition is 38,000 RMB in a city, which is Shanghai, where the average yearly income is 51,968 RMB. And as you can see, the 38,051, it's a pretty close number, and this is Shanghai, which is one of the wealthiest cities in China. Lastly, I would like to talk about the overall significance. The Gaokao, we know, is really the most influential factor, and further possible studies could go on to study about these Sino-foreign joint education programs, meaning China and other countries. The other aspects which could be researched include language upon arrival. Also, are Sino joint ventures advantageous to local students? And lastly, did studying abroad benefit these students in their future goals? So maybe we could talk to students 4 years down the road and ask, you know, did it help you? Is it what you wanted? well, that sums it all about up. Thank you so much for listening to my study, and here are the